Thanks so much, everyone. I'm overwhelmed by your kindness and your generosity to me here tonight. And every time I've come to Pittsburgh, it's been the same. I've visited and lived in a number of different cities in America, Milwaukee, San Francisco, Minneapolis, New York, Boston. None of them have quite the same sense of community as I feel I move into as soon as I come here. I don't know why it is. You have a very dramatic and kind of violent history here, and examples of not some people who are not very community minded, and other people very community minded. I first came here to play Hamlet, actually, with my family. In what was it, 1991, I think. 1991, my friend Richard Rao helped to sponsor and brought me here. And I was taken during that performance at the Public to, actually it was on the north side, it was in the old Allegheny, one of Mr. Carnegie's halls, wasn't it? And one day when I had a day off, a friend of mine, a school teacher who lived here, George, said, "Would you like to see Clayton?" And I didn't know anything about it. And I said, sure, mostly just to really hang out with George and have a nice day. And I went up to that extraordinary house, bought the book about Henry Clay Frick, and I remember reading it on the airplane and crying when I read about his daughter, little Martha, who swallowed that pin. One of the smallest things you can make out of metal. Isn't that extraordinary? And of course, as you all know, he didn't know that she had swallowed it. I think it moved through her body for about 18 months, infecting all her internal organs, and eventually exited the side of her body. She came in one day and said, "Daddy, what's this?" And she died the death of a very old person. There's even a scene, isn't there? There's a scene in my mind of him standing up in the up near Cresson. Is that right? That's the name of it? Yeah, Cresson. I think he was in Mr. Carnegie's a little cottage that he and Margaret used to stay in up there. And it's the night before she dies, and they want to, they have some idea that some kind of operation might help. But she has to take a pill before she does this. And Mr. Frick is in the hallway outside, and the doctor goes in to say to her, "Please, Martha, we'd like you to take this pill. It's very good for you. It will make you feel a lot better." And she says to the doctor, this little 6-year-old, "Oh, if it will make someone feel better, would you please give it to my father, because he looks so sad." And it's the only time in my study of Mr. Frick that he shows emotion, and he gives a kind of howl in the hallway. And I can well connect with it. So this drew me in, and I was very curious about him. And then to my surprise, I couldn't find anyone in Pittsburgh who felt the same way about Mr. Frick. And I thought, there's a story here. At the time, I was increasingly concerned. And then I came back again in 2002 to play Twelfth Night here, and then the next year to play Measure for Measure in your lovely new public theater. Thank you very much. And I was increasingly concerned at that time about I suppose about what seemed to me the growing power of corporations in our democratic processes. And it's increased even more since. Now, not that corporations are necessarily a bad thing. Your Constitution took great care to contain them. The tea that was thrown in Boston Harbor was not English tea, it was an English corporation tea that they were throwing in. Not that there weren't problems with England too. I'm not going to be flying the English flag on the 4th of July. But the Constitution took great care to contain corporations, and all those things have been broken down. So the corporations now have most of the rights that were given to us as individuals by the Constitution. including the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. In those years, 1890 to 1910, I've read that of the 275 applications for the 14th Amendment, which was meant to protect the right of slaves, only about 17 of them are for slaves. The rest are all applications by corporations. So I became very concerned about this conflict of democracy and republicanism, which offers some kind of equality and fairness to citizens in my country and in yours here, that somehow things will be shared and things will be equal and each person will be valued in the same way. And on the other hand, capitalism, liberal capitalism particularly, which has created great wonders in the world, and yet it doesn't deliver equally. It tries to, but it doesn't deliver equally, and the gaps in wealth in both our countries have grown so great that one feels at times a little nervous that one is standing under a cliff where a hell of a lot of stuff's going to fall down at any moment, or standing above one of those patch town sink wells, and that a lot of stuff is going to fall through the ground at any moment. So the story of the grief, the story of Mr. Frick, of what made him so hard during this 1892 strike, during the time that O'Donnell and McClutty and these people were meeting up here as the advisory council and trying to find a way through. What was it? It was $1. It was $1 difference for a billet, wasn't it? For a 4x4 billet, the base in the sliding scale, at the bottom of the sliding scale, it was $1 difference that was the cause of this debate. Was it really about $1? It was obviously about something more. One of the things that's happening to Mr. Frick when he's crying in the hallway the day before his daughter dies is that he's been very busy dealing with the strike in Morewood, hasn't he? In which how many people died, Charlie? 11 people died. He'd been dealing with that the whole time. Was he angry that in the last months of his daughter's life he'd been distracted by that? Did he take out the rage one feels when one suffers a terrible fate as the death of a daughter? Did he take that out on the Union in 1892? What is it that makes a man into steel? Is it something similar to the process of making steel itself? These kind of questions became interesting to me, and they became kind of important. As now the CEOs of big companies, they're all protected by, aren't they, by media people, and do we even know them? Do we know what makes them tick? It seemed important to me to know what makes them tick, how it works. And you have to go back to this period, this Gilded Age, this time of Herbert Spencer and social Darwinism, and this new idea of what's the best way to express it? I heard this story once, that before this time, let's say you had a farm and you had 3 or 4 kids, and the neighbor next to you had a farm and they had 3 or 4 kids too, and they suffered a disaster and they lost their kids. Before this time, you would say to your kids, 1 or 2 of them, you go and work for the neighbor's farm and help them until they get back on their feet. That would be the thing that you would think was right to do. Well, in this period, a new philosophy came into place and said, no, if you do that, you're a fool. That's not nature's way. Nature's way is that tragedy in your neighbor's farm is offering you an opportunity. It's offering you a chance to buy that farm cheap. Is it cruel? No, it's natural. That's how nature is. And so this thought kind of it seems like it infected the time a bit. And you see it acted out at that time. And you see people, what's unusual about that time is you see people proud to be behaving that way. You see Mr. Carnegie inspired by these ideas of competition. It's no longer even work for God in a Puritan way. It's just work. It's just to obtain things. Nowadays, that idea is still around, I fear. Maybe not so much in our countries. We've outsourced all this work, haven't we, to other countries. There aren't forced 24-hour shifts here anymore. There's voluntary 24-hour shifts if someone really needs it or wants to do it. But out in other countries, there are. So going back to this period, going back to this history, it's all open, it's all out there. You can see it. It's an open cast mine. So it's a very interesting period to inform our time. I talked about Mr. Frick. Obviously, I then became very aware of Mr. Carnegie. I became very aware of Mr. Honest John McCluskey and Hugh O'Donnell. I became very aware also of Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman. I'm a pacifist, so I don't stand by a violent solution to anything if I can avoid it. If my wife was standing here and you attacked her, I would probably attack you. But I mean conscious violence. I'm not unconscious reaction of defense. So I don't stand by Mr. Berkman. But I was very interested that these radical people, Emma Goldman and Berkman and Most is his name, anarchists, hang them in Haymarket in Chicago. What were they asking for? They were asking for laws about child labor to protect children. They were asking for some reasonable hours of work in a workplace. They were asking for some kind of insurance or help for people in a workplace if they got injured. They were interested in income tax. They were interested in laws against insider trading. There are a number of things that if they were alive now, they'd be mainstream politicians, wouldn't they? So maybe we need to look at the people who are on the edge of society. Maybe we need to listen. Maybe their crazy ideas are the future. I don't know, it got me thinking. I heard Hilary Mantel speak the other day, the author of Wolf Hall, and she's a great historian. Do you know she lives every day of her life in pain? She has a very debilitating disease and still manages to write those incredible books. Anyway, she was being interviewed, and she said, someone asked her about history, why is it important? And she said, history is a revolutionary act. History is a revolutionary act. Because if things were different in the past, then things can be different in the future, will be different in the future, and perhaps they can be better. If things were different in the past, they will be different in the future, and perhaps they can be better. We have enormous difficulties facing us now, enormous difficulties facing us. But some things have got better in the 125 years. There is income tax now to share wealth, whatever we all think of it. It is a sharing of wealth. There are better laws about child labor and about safety in a plant like Edgar Thompson. Enormous care for safety in that plant. I was visiting there, just not a tour or anything, but just visiting people. They have a sign now in Edgar Thompson plant of all the months, the last 8 months, and they have a number for that plant and the Irving Works and Clairton, naming how many people were injured. It's only 1 or 2, something like that. It's not much. But I thought, what an improvement. What an improvement that management admits that this has been an accident. This has been something wrong. We don't want it to happen. We want it not to happen. So the communication is so much better, it seems. Anyway, that's the hope I get from this story, and the hope that I hope my eventual play, my play with my dear friend Peter Reeder, will share. Peter Reeder also came and worked here for the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. How many years back? In 2008, and also got bit by this history, like I assume all of you are very, all Yuns are very, yeah. Are taking it, and he kept writing to me and saying, when are you going to get on with that play? When are you get on with that play? When are you getting on with that play? And I was a little bit distracted in the last few years. But we are getting on, and he's really lit the spark for me again. And I know there's a number of you here who are also working on the play, which is great. I know that Wally and your friend Mark, you're working on some stuff about this. There can't be too few plays about this. Someone was saying the relationship of Frick and Carnegie reminds them a little bit of the relationship of Cromwell and Henry VIII. And you'd think that story had been told enough, but still it gets told. So some stories are central to a culture, aren't they? And that story of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn is for some reason very, very central to the English people. And this story is very, very central to your culture here. It's lovely to be amongst a bunch of people who appreciate history and to hear such eloquent speakers about history. Even if I never get the play done, I'll enjoy coming back over and over and over again and hearing you all. So on Thursday, I'm going to revive some bits of Hamlet, as that was what first brought me here. I want to look at the aspect of Hamlet as a prince. Kings, queens, princes, princesses, they're archetypes in a way, aren't they? I believe each of us has a king or a queen within us. Each of us has a prince or princess within us. What is the prince part of us? When I played Hamlet, which I did for about 400 times, 400 performances, I was encouraged at that time in my acting to think that every person has little objectives. I have an objective now to say something worthwhile to you. And then they have super objectives, something that's key to them as a person. You might think about it yourself now. What's the central thing? I'm talking about things like love, security, health. What's the key thing for you that if you lost any hope that you would ever have that in your life, you might consider suicide? That's what a super objective is. And for Hamlet, I felt it was harmony. It was some sense of harmony in Elsinore, some sense of justice. And I think maybe that's the thing that is the prince in us. That thing in us that feels, that looks around and thinks, wait a minute, things aren't right. Something's rotten in the state of Elsinore. Oh, cursed fate that ever I was born to set it right. That part of us that looks beyond ourselves. And so it's a part of us that might become a king or might become a queen. What is a king or queen? I think it's someone who's able to sit in the middle and fairly give justice without discrimination to every person who's in a particular place. A prince is not able to do that, and Hamlet isn't able to do that. But you see in the course of the play him learning how to do that. So it's that part in us, a princess or a prince, that grieves for the wrongs of others and can't sleep until things are set right. So in that light, I want to share some of Hamlet's journey with you. And then Peter Reeder and I, and some wonderful actors who you know, Wally and David Conrad, and a number of other actors are going to help us just share some of our rough, raw scenes. We've had two devastating attacks. One on a bridge, London Bridge, that my daughter runs across most evenings at 10. She happened to be away that night. But the most telling event has been this fire in Grenfell Tower, which has taken place in the wealthiest borough of the whole of England. It perhaps is one of the wealthiest communities in the whole of the world. And here were these people, these poorer people, in this tower with no escape. Peter Reeder was saying to me yesterday that one of the marble tabletops of a kitchen of one of the wealthy houses next to the tower was about the same price as it would have cost to put fireproof cladding on that tower. So the times are speaking to us, aren't they? They're speaking to us in such dramatic ways. The last quote I'll leave with you is this one, which I heard today over in Braddock, and I thought was so beautiful. Steel does not want to be steel. It wants to return via rust to be iron. Steel does not want to be steel. It wants to become iron again and be back in the earth. Isn't that an amazing idea? Maybe that's a part of us as well. Maybe a part of us want to have a more mutual relationship with this beautiful planet we're on and with each other. And that's our hope. So thanks for listening to me tonight. Thanks for coming out.
I wanted to invite Peter up. I have a small gift. Yeah. Peter, if Peter could come up, I have a small gift. I just want to say a friend of ours, a friend of the Battle of Homestead, Eugene Levy, who passed away in the 90s. But when we were doing The River Ran Red, the book, and we were doing the film, he was our great champion, and he was also the only historian on the block, and so he kept us honest. He was Dave Demarest, good walking buddy.
Yeah, took me
And
to see the
that's right. And yes. And Gene kept telling us at every turn that we had to archive everything. including the T-shirts. So I saved a couple. They are used. They aren't brand new, but we wanted to make sure that you would have them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
I want to remind you that we have a silent auction, we have wine, we have more to eat, so please enjoy yourselves.